A young black boy was sketching airplanes at his local airport, chasing his dream of becoming a pilot. But instead of encouragement, a veteran pilot called the police on him. Moments later, that pilot would realize he had made the biggest mistake of his career, because the boy's father was no ordinary man. He was one of the most powerful officials in aviation. It all began on a warm Saturday afternoon at a small regional airport. The sun glistened off the silver wings of airplanes as they prepared for takeoff, the steady hum of engines blending with the chatter of airport staff and distant radio calls. 12-year-old Jamal stood quietly near the chain-link fence, a worn-out sketchbook in his hands and a sharpened pencil tucked behind his ear. This was his favorite spot in the entire world. Every weekend, Jamal came here to observe the airplanes, studying how the wheels lifted, how the wings tilted during turns, and how the pilots communicated with the control tower. Each line in his notebook represented more than just a sketch. It was a piece of his dream. One day, he told himself he wouldn't just be watching planes, he'd be flying them. But not everyone at the airport saw Jamal's passion the way he did. Across the tarmac, a veteran pilot in a crisp white shirt and navy epaulets adjusted his sunglasses. His sharp eyes scanned the area until they landed on the young boy by the fence. Instead of noticing the child's innocent fascination, the pilot's thoughts immediately shifted to suspicion. "Who was that kid hanging around the fence?" he muttered under his breath, narrowing his eyes. The boy's notebook, the way he was studying every plane movement, the intensity on his young face, it all looked unusual to the pilot. At least, that's how he chose to see it. Rather than walking over and asking, the pilot allowed his assumptions to guide him. He frowned, convinced that Jamal didn't belong there, that he might even be a threat. The fact that Jamal was a black boy, standing alone in an area often frequented by older, wealthier aviation enthusiasts, only fueled the man's biased judgment. Within minutes, the pilot pulled out his phone. His voice was low but urgent as he spoke. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious person near the runway fence. Looks like a trespasser, maybe a security risk. Yes, send someone quickly." The call was made. Jamal, meanwhile, was blissfully unaware of what was happening behind the scenes. His pencil moved quickly across the page as he sketched the landing gear of a small Cessna, his eyes wide with concentration. Every detail mattered to him: the flaps, the tail rudder, even the pilot's hand movements in the cockpit. He had no idea that at that very moment, police officers were already on their way. What started as an innocent afternoon of learning was about to spiral into something far darker. The whir of an engine overhead was soon drowned out by the distant wail of sirens. Jamal looked up, startled. Why would there be police at the airport on such a quiet afternoon? As the sound grew louder, a knot formed in his stomach. He didn't know it yet, but the pilot's quick call would set off a chain of events that would not only shake the small airport, but also expose the dangers of snap judgments. And before the day was over, the veteran pilot who had made that call would face a moment of humiliation he would never forget. As Jamal sketched another plane lifting gracefully into the sky, his imagination soared higher than the engines. In his mind, he was already there, inside the cockpit, gripping the controls, guiding hundreds of passengers safely across the clouds. He could almost hear the chatter of the control tower in his headset, the thrill of pushing forward the throttle, the exhilaration of lifting into the open sky. But Jamal's dream wasn't just about flying. It was about representation, about proving that kids like him could belong in the world of aviation. He had read the statistics. He knew that only a very small percentage of pilots were black. Every time he sketched an airplane, every time he studied the way a wing tilted or the way the wheels touched down, he told himself, "One day, I'll be part of the change." Unknown to the veteran pilot who had reported him, Jamal wasn't doing anything wrong. He had permission to be there. One of the kind airport staff, a man who had noticed the boy's dedication weeks earlier, had given him a safe place near the fence to observe. "As long as you stay here and don't interfere, you're welcome," the staff member had told him. To Jamal, it had felt like a golden ticket, a small but meaningful invitation into the world he longed to join. Then came the sound that shattered everything. The sudden roar of sirens broke Jamal's concentration. His pencil froze midline, his eyes darting toward the road leading into the airport grounds. 2 police cars came speeding in, lights flashing and sirens wailing. The sound was deafening compared to the steady hum of the airplanes. Jamal's heart skipped. "What's happening?" he whispered to himself. The cars screeched to a stop beside the fence. Doors swung open, and 2 uniformed officers stepped out briskly, their eyes immediately scanning the area. Within seconds, they locked onto Jamal. "You there!" one officer barked, his voice sharp and commanding. "What are you doing?" The force in the man's tone made Jamal flinch. Startled, he dropped his notebook to the ground, its pages fluttering open to reveal carefully drawn sketches of wings, wheels, and cockpits. His hands trembled as he raised them slightly, unsure what to do. I'm just watching the plane, sir," Jamal stammered, his voice small and shaky. The officers exchanged glances. To them, he looked like a scared kid, but they were responding to what they thought was a serious threat. The pilot who had called them had painted a picture of a possible trespasser, maybe even someone with dangerous intentions. Meanwhile, standing proudly a few feet away, the veteran pilot crossed his arms with satisfaction. To him, this was confirmation that he had done the right thing. He believed he had protected the airport, kept things safe. In his mind, the boy's fear was proof he didn't belong there in the first place. But what the pilot didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that this moment, this decision to summon the police on a boy with a notebook, would come back to haunt him. The sirens, the flashing lights, the terrified look in Jamal's eyes, these were not signs of danger. They were signs of injustice. And very soon, the man who had felt so confident in his choice would find himself facing a wave of regret that no amount of pride could protect him from. The officers were still questioning Jamal, their tone firm but confused, when the hum of another vehicle cut through the tension. A sleek black sedan rolled up slowly to the scene. The moment it stopped, the doors clicked open, and out stepped a tall, commanding man dressed in a sharp dark suit. It was Mr. Carter, Jamal's father. His stride was steady, his posture unshakable, and though his face carried calmness, his eyes spoke volumes. He was a man used to walking into rooms where authority was tested, and his very presence shifted the air around him. "Is there a problem here?" Mr. Carter's voice was firm, low, and unwavering as he approached. The nearest officer straightened. "Sir, we received a call about a trespasser near the runway." "That boy," Mr. Carter interrupted sharply, his finger pointing toward Jamal, "is my son." The officers froze, glancing at each other awkwardly. Jamal, still clutching his sketchbook to his chest, looked at his father with wide, tearful eyes. Relief washed over him, but the tension of the moment lingered like a heavy cloud. Then the pilot stepped forward. His uniform was crisp, his chin lifted high, as though he were still in control of the situation. "Sir, with all due respect, children shouldn't be lurking near secure areas. I had to call the authorities for safety reasons." His tone carried the smug confidence of someone convinced they were right. Mr. Carter bent down briefly, picking up Jamal's notebook from the ground. He flipped through the pages, detailed sketches of cockpits, engines, landing gear, drawings far too precise for a child just doodling. Each page was evidence of a dream carefully nurtured. He snapped the notebook shut and turned his gaze on the pilot. His voice was steady, but there was steel underneath. "My son wasn't trespassing. He had permission to be here. The staff already knew about him, because he comes here to learn, not to cause trouble. And before you stand there and try to lecture me about airport safety," Mr. Carter stepped closer, his eyes locked on the pilot's. "Maybe you should know who I am." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They could feel the atmosphere shift. This wasn't just a father defending his child. This was a man who carried weight, someone whose authority might outrank everyone else standing there. The pilot's confident stance wavered. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. His arms, once folded in certainty, now shifted slightly as if he wasn't so sure of himself anymore. He glanced at the officers, expecting backup, but they remained silent, waiting. Mr. Carter's calm expression never changed, but his presence was enough to silence the airfield. Jamal looked up at his father, realizing that something far bigger was unfolding, something that was about to turn the tables completely. The stage was set, and the pilot, who had believed he was acting out of duty, was about to discover that his snap judgment had dragged him into the worst mistake of his career. Mr. Carter pulled out his identification wallet and handed it to the nearest officer. The golden badge caught the sunlight, shining with an authority that needed no explanation. Stamped across it in bold letters, Federal Aviation Administration, Senior Administrator. For a moment, everything stood still. The pilot, who had been so sure of himself, froze in place. His smug smile evaporated, replaced by a look of dawning horror. His throat went dry, and the color drained from his face as the truth hit him like a thunderbolt. He hadn't just called the police on a boy with a notebook. He hadn't just disrupted an innocent child's Saturday afternoon. He had reported the son of one of the most powerful officials in the aviation industry, the very agency that oversaw his career, his license, and his future in the cockpit. "You're with the FAA?" The pilot stammered, his voice trembling despite his effort to stay composed. Mr. Carter slipped his badge back into his suit pocket with deliberate calm. "That's right," he said firmly. "And I oversee regulations that cover pilots like you. I spend my career making sure the skies are safe. But tell me, how safe is the future of aviation when children who love airplanes are treated like criminals just for watching them?" The words cut sharper than any shout could have. The officers shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence melting away. They had walked into this situation believing they were protecting airport security. Now they realized they'd been used as pawns in a pilot's snap judgment, one rooted not in safety, but in bias. Their silence spoke volumes. Jamal stood frozen, clutching his sketchbook as though it were a shield. His hands still trembled, but when his father's strong hand rested on his shoulder, some of the fear ebbed away. The steady warmth of that grip told him, "You're safe now. I've got you." Mr. Carter crouched slightly so he could look Jamal in the eye. His tone softened. "Son, you did nothing wrong. You belong here just as much as anyone else." Jamal swallowed hard, nodding, though his young eyes still flicked nervously toward the pilot. Straightening again, Mr. Carter turned back to the man in uniform. His voice regained its steel. "Instead of encouraging a boy with a dream, you assumed the worst because of how he looks. You didn't see his notebook. You didn't see his sketches. All you saw was what you wanted to see, a problem where none existed." The silence that followed was heavy. The officer said nothing. The pilot opened his mouth as if to respond, but closed it again, realizing there was nothing he could say that would undo the damage. For the first time in a long career, he felt completely powerless. Not in the cockpit, not in control, but standing exposed, his judgment laid bare for everyone to see. And next to him, Jamal stood taller, his notebook pressed to his chest like a symbol of the dream that no one, not even a misguided pilot, could take away from him. Mr. Carter didn't raise his voice, but his words carried a weight that felt heavier than a shout. His tone was calm, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. "Every pilot should know," he began, his eyes locked on the man who had called the police, "that the future of aviation depends on inspiring young minds, not shutting them out. Every time a child stands at a fence with curiosity in their eyes, that's the future knocking at the door. My son could one day be in your shoes, guiding passengers safely across the skies. But today, instead of being welcomed, he was treated like a threat." The words sank deep. The pilot's shoulders slumped as if someone had placed a heavy weight on them. His chin dropped, his eyes unable to meet the man in front of him. A murmur left his lips, a faint apology. But the sound was hollow, and everyone there knew it was too late. The damage was already done. In that single phone call, the pilot had humiliated a child, frightened him with flashing lights and sirens, and exposed his own bias in front of not just law enforcement, but one of the highest-ranking officials in the aviation world. It was the kind of mistake that couldn't be erased with a few words of regret. Mr. Carter gave a small nod to the officers, signaling that the matter was closed. Then he turned to Jamal and gently guided him away from the fence. Jamal clutched his sketchbook tightly, his young face still pale from the scare, but now steadied by the comforting presence of his father. Just as they were about to leave, Mr. Carter paused. He turned back one last time, his voice carrying across the tarmac. "Next time you see a child with a passion for planes," he said, his eyes locked on the pilot, "maybe think twice before you crush their dream." The silence that followed was deafening. It didn't take long for the story of what had happened that afternoon to spread through the airport community. Staff members who knew Jamal rallied behind him. They spoke of the times they had seen him watching quietly, asking polite questions, sketching with a focus far beyond his years. They praised his dedication and reminded each other, and the pilot, that the sky should never belong to just a few. It should belong to anyone willing to chase it. And as for Jamal, what could have been the end of his dream became fuel for it instead. The fear he had felt standing before flashing lights and stern voices was replaced with determination. He promised himself that one day, he wouldn't just be sketching airplanes. He would be in the cockpit, proving to every doubter that he was meant to fly. The pilot, however, was left with a bitter memory. Each time he saw a child near the airport fence, he remembered the day his own prejudice had been laid bare. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was a painful lesson. Never judge someone by their appearance, because you never truly know who they are, who they will become, or who might be standing right behind them. Studio microphone. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And make sure to subscribe with the bell on so you never miss more powerful stories like this one.